So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end, period Shiahu the prophet. Then we find the 61st chapter, known as Isaiah, the completion of the spring feast, the first part of it, and the mentioning of the autumn feast, or then the vengeance, and then the restoration of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As far as the Gentile level also included in the plan, we find then the world transitioning itself from the time of the 1,000 years of deceit, where the world then obviously thought they could do whatever they want, and for that limit, for that time, the world did. But then we are back on the schedule, and understandably the nations must understand and respect the ownership of the Creator, because He is the owner of the earth. He is the owner whatsoever exists, and it is then for our benefit being respectful of His ownership and His schedule. So then we find ourselves understanding then the 11th chapter of Daniel, and we find also references, for instance, when Daniel was fasting and praying for 20 plus days, he was then having a spiritual warfare with the king of Persia. When you read the understanding of the spirit of the king of Persia, there is a layer of this understanding in Daniel, and there is a layer of this understanding also in Ezekiel, the 38th chapter. Those layers, they are the same situation. However, we must understand, when Daniel was explaining of the time of the restoration period, our time, from 2009 until 2032, we find then a period where then the restoration is included. Until 2032, this age must be closed. We find then the time of reduction from 2032, plus we find then 490 days, second half of the instructions and the prophets. So let's understand then Daniel, then when he was in a spiritual warfare against the spirit of Persia. It is a conquering spirit. Let's try to understand these, then what it means in the spirit from a high-ranking person as was then Daniel. Daniel, he was then a politician, a tradesperson, and a person acquainted with tabernacling. He was then most of his time spending then with the Gentile level, explaining the intricacies of the Gentile time in the earth. So then we find this layer of Daniel related with the king of Persia, and he was fasting. Then you find in Ezekiel. Ezekiel is the contemporary of Daniel's time. Then you find the 38th chapter, another layer regarding the same understanding. It is a conquering spirit. So then when we understand the time of restoration, we must obviously understand the geographical area related with the Persia. Not only the geographical area then you locked your mind on, but then you not only do the geographical area of Daniel's time, but what it meant as a conquering spirit. When you transfer these data then with our time, the 11th chapter, then we understand then the kingdom of the north then earning this spirit of conquer, or a conquering spirit. So let's try to understand what this means. You have the dragon related with China. China has the most powerful and the most contemporary and modern computerized trade on the planet. You find then the Babylonian system with its many ramifications. Many of them. Some of them were, for instance, from Germany. And then the conquering spirit was for a time in Germany. So this situation of raising the right arm as the Nazi, it was then the conquering spirit during the time of deceit. Understandable. It was tailor-made for the time when Germany was then given this conquering spirit, and nearly they conquered. Then during this time we are then experiencing ourselves during a transitional time from the deceit where most of our learning comes from, and then we are updating our data, understanding then the heavenly schedule. There is a conquering spirit when you read from Daniel. It is related with the kingdom of the north, and then there is a relation with the kingdom of the south. But then the kingdom of the north, there is a prominency or then leadership coming from. So let's try to understand then the kingdom of the north, what used to be the Soviet Union. The spirit of conquering, or the conquering spirit, is given them. They have this spirit, but it's not as used to be as we've learned from the time of deceit. It's not the same spirit of the Soviet Union. It's not the same spirit of Germany. It's not the same spirit as Alexander the Great or Babylon, or then the Medo and the Persians, or then the Roman Empire. It is then the conquering spirit tailor-made from the northern kingdom. The dragon, however, holds the system. He must be the first every time. When we are not speaking of tabernacling, the dragon comes next, and then the rest of us afterwards. The Messiah is not even categorized after tabernacling, because he is tabernacling. Afterwards then is the dragon. The dragon holds the system, and he is at the moment doing his work in China via precision. So then afterwards, because of the so many multi-ramifications of the Babylonian system, where you find then a section in Germany raising the right arm and then Nazis, then you find the old Soviet Union, then you find then the other kingdoms. This time China will to provide a manager for themselves, where then the Soviet Union, what used to be, tailor-made its own form of government. They were granted with the conquering spirit. So when we read Daniel the 11th chapter and then Ezekiel related with Persia, it was related during the time of Daniel, the most powerful conquering spirit of the time. So then in the spirit we understand what it means. But then the practical side of it is understanding China holds the trade. So then we understand what it means then at this moment, the bell and the dragon. However, these must work together for a neutral goal. It is then providing the world with a trade. But because of so many interests, because of so many interferences, because of so many ramifications of the Babylonian system, it must be then filtered through per then the kingdom of the north. So when you make a reference of Daniel, for instance, the 11th chapter and the 38th chapter, Ezekiel is explaining of the king of Persia. It is the conquering spirit. Then you find Daniel speaking of the same spirit. Then you find during the time of the 11th chapter, where then the kingdom of the north and the kingdom of the south are having a relationship, mainly because of raw materials. So then the system can start become more available for other nations. But thus far, other nations are ramified by thousands of understandings of the Babylonian system, where each of them, they think they have the right or then the proper spirit of some sort. If you go to a country, they think the best way is doing the way they are doing. If you go to the other country, they think they have the best way of doing things. If you go to another country, they have then the way of doing their things. And they think, each of those think they have the proper way of doing it. Those are ramifications of a Babylonian system. And these must be put under the control. Thus then, the conquering spirit spoken of Daniel and Ezekiel related with the time of the restoration, where then not only you understand the base of the statue in the 2nd chapter, but then you understand the 11th chapter and the 12th chapter, because the 12th chapter gives you then the combat of the end, and then you understand the 11th chapter prior of, gives you then the time of the restoration period. But then you understand the location where the time and the season is at. Not per tabernacling, but where then the shadow prophetic events related then with the Gentile, as we understand the spirit movement in the heavens. There is a relation with tabernacling and times and seasons. At the same time, the Gentiles are included in the plan. So there is a time and a season related with the Gentile level. So then the spirit of the northern kingdom is tailor-made of their own. As they are hired then as managers, they come up with their own tailor-made system. Nobody knows what it is. But it's not from Germany, it's not from Rome, it's not from Greco and the Romans, it's not from Babylon, it's not from any other nation, but tailor-made themselves. So then when they are provided with management, then the conquering spirit then takes place in their system where they manage. Thus far, we do have some understanding of it because of what used to be the Soviet Union. But then we know that the later status is higher than the first. So then when you read the geographical area of Daniel, you read Persia, location, you read then the conquering spirit of the time. When Daniel was making a refined explanation of the base of the statue, iron and clay, and iron and clay started after the Roman Empire then was dismantled. But then during the time of the seat, you find the nations trying to come together, but they would not adhere to each other. Then you find then a peak of knowledge at the end of it, from a tradesperson, computerized the system, trade online directly. It must be placed under the control. There are so many interferences in the world because of the Babylonian system. You have, for instance, the Germanic spirit, the Nazi spirit, in raising the right hand or the right arm. This spirit no longer exists. It's only in our memories. So when we are relating with each other and there is a spirit of conquering, they tend to raise the right arm of some sort. No longer exists. Those were concocted during the time of the seat. What we do understand from the kingdom of the north, there is a tailor-made of their very own. And the rest of the world don't know what it is. But what the world do know is then whatsoever they are ramifying themselves from the time of the Babylonian deceit, each of them they are wrong. Because they must be placed under the control, or we find ourselves precisely this time trying to go against then the Chinese system or the dragon's system. And obviously it won't work. So in order to not interfere with the dragon's plan of the Chinese system, so then it has to have a manager or management of the Babylonian system, but this Babylonian system is in the spirit. However, there is the trade factor. Some nations, they tend to mix up their own gods and they trying to make the middleman. The middleman is the problem. The Chinese system is direct trade via online. Nations, they get taxes from parcels, from freight, from ships then transporting cargo. That's where they get their money from. People then, they work, they have regular work, they pay their taxes. They do trade in the system. When they order parts, they order parcels, they pay taxes. When they have the products resold, then they pay taxes. But then the spirit in the world only has a spirit, and it is in the northern kingdom. It is unequal of any of them from the past. There are some similarities, but then the conquering facet of the spirit granted for the northern kingdom is of their very own. What we do understand is this time they are going to become greater than the first. So then when we read a couple of chapters later, Bel and the dragon, then we understand what it means. It does not mean that the northern kingdom is going to get defeated. That's not the point. The point is the Babylonian system must be placed under the control. A system in the spirit, where people, they get so mixed up with the religion. If you go to India, they think it should be done in a certain way. If you go to Germany, it should be done in a certain way. If you go to France, it should be done in a certain way. If you come to US, nobody knows what it is. If you go to the South, then it's another way. If you go to Australia, it's another way. If you go to New Zealand, it's another way. It can't continue, because Daniel spoke of a conquering spirit of the time, but then you have to make a transfer of the conquering spirit of his time on our time. That's why understanding in layers is crucial. Otherwise, a person then has no understanding of the instructions. So what's coming then, it is obviously a form of trade from the Chinese, from the dragon system. So then when it relates with Babylonian style, and we know of where then you find the mixing of tabernacling in the world, try to understand the concept. Those nations, they are then mixed up with what they thought was a Savior, what they thought was God. When the tabernacle mixed up with the world, those must be under a leadership only. So then the world can flow and do trade as they should have. So what do we understand out of this? Giving way then to the northern kingdom. So then they can do what they should do. But thus far we find then China being cornered, because we find the nations coming together. We find the US, you find Japan, you find Australia. Japan printing out more money. We in the USA, we don't even have a record anymore how much money we are printing, but it's a lot. You find in Australia, in the South Pacific. And these then, they're going to work together from what they developed during the time of the Babylonian system of deceit, of 1,000 years of deceit, to maintain what they thought was proper. And these then going against the Chinese, obviously. Because they think they can conquer. They think they have the conquering spirit and they can conquer China. There is no way. China has the dragon system. The very precision, the time that we are living at this time. When Daniel said knowledge would increase, and then would start in then the period of the dragon. China is the system of the dragon in the spirit. Try to understand. Understanding of precision, understanding of trade via online. Then you understand later when the Messiah speaks of the traders or then freighters. Doing trade at the sea, then the volume of trade. But must have a leadership from the northern kingdom make sure then the other nations, they don't come up with the ideas of their own. Would be a manager and an enforcer of the Chinese system. So then the world can do trade via online. Truly, it's not complicated. But then, from a person that was born during the time of deceit, never acquainted with the holy instructions from the Israelic lineage, the very original manuscripts, the most of the world were mesmerized because of a Greco-Roman translation doesn't exist. They were never taught in layers, so it takes time to get used to it. So then let's be prepared, because we understand at some point China is going to get cornered and they must hire the services of the Northern Kingdom. That's when then the rest of the world, they're going to back away from their crazy plans and they're going to behave themselves. That's why then later then the Chinese system becomes available, so you can download in your computer and you can do trade. Not only you have your regular job, you pay your dues, you pay your taxes, but then there is also this system providing more cash and more forms of taxes. But if we don't do our homework, how are we going to have a subsystem so then people can do what is normal under their own subsystems, plus then doing trade with the Chinese? That's why the world is going up and down and sideways. Europe is wallowing around. North America is wallowing around. They try to come up with some sort of a friendship, some sort of a plan, but it won't work. The conquering spirit of this area was granted exclusively for the Northern Kingdom. The rest of us, we have only an option: retrieval and then work in our own subsystems. When we do this, we acknowledge the ownership of the Creator as the heavens and the earth, and then we do what's on the schedule. If we go against it, works against us. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.